The room was the color of weak tea. Everything in it felt thin. The air, the light filtering through the blinds, the synthetic fabric of the chair biting into the back of Alara's thighs. Even the grief felt thin now, stretched taut over 23 years and worn through by this final, abrasive afternoon. She was 23 years old. Across the polished expanse of the mahogany desk, her Aunt Carol smiled a smile that did not reach her eyes. It was a small, sharp smile, the kind one might give upon finding a forgotten $20 bill in a winter coat. Her Uncle Richard, sitting beside Carol, merely looked uncomfortable. He fiddled with the cuff of his shirt, his gaze skittering around the lawyer's office, landing everywhere but on Alara. Mr. Fields, the lawyer, cleared his throat. It was a dry, rustling sound, like dead leaves skittering across pavement. He adjusted his glasses and looked down at the papers in front of him. "As you can see," he said, his voice as colorless as the room, "Thomas's estate is quite straightforward." Alara said nothing. She watched a dust mote dance in a sunbeam, a tiny, brilliant world, spinning all on its own. Her father was dead. That was straightforward. He had collapsed at his workbench 2 weeks ago, his heart giving out without ceremony or warning. That was straightforward. What was happening now was not. "The primary residence," Mr. Fields continued, tapping a paragraph with a manicured finger, "valued at $450,000, passes to his sister, Carol Sterling." Aunt Carol's smile tightened, a fractional, triumphant twitch. That was the house Alara had grown up in, the one with the porch swing her father had built, the groove in the kitchen floor where she'd dropped a cast-iron pan, the pencil marks on the doorframe charting her height. It was not a primary residence. It was home. It was gone. The savings and investment accounts, totaling approximately $72,000, also revert to Mr. Sterling and his wife. Richard flinched at the mention of his name, as if suddenly woken. That was the money for Alara's college, the fund her father had painstakingly built. He had always told her, "You'll do something with your head, Ellie. Not your hands, like me. Your hands are for you. Your head is for the world." That was gone, too. "And finally," the lawyer said, shuffling a page, "the contents of the workshop, including all tools and equipment." He glanced at a separate appraisal sheet. "Valued at a considerable sum. These also passed to the Sterlings." A cold, hard knot formed in Alara's stomach. Not the tools. Anything but the tools. The worn handles of his chisels, smooth as river stones from the oil of his hands. The smell of sawdust and steel. His legacy. Carol let out a small, theatrical sigh. Such a burden, really. All that clutter. Richard will have to hire someone to clear it all out before we can list the place. The cruelty was so casual it was almost elegant. It left no room for argument. It was a solid, polished wall she could beat her fists against until they were bloody, and it would not move. Alara finally looked away from the dust mote. She looked at her aunt, at the woman who shared her father's blood, but none of his heart. Carol met her gaze, her eyes flat and shiny like polished stones. There was no malice in them. There was nothing. It was the detached appraisal of a butcher looking at a side of beef. "So," Alara's voice was a rasp, the first sound she had made in an hour. "There's nothing." Mr. Fields shifted uncomfortably. "Well, not exactly nothing. There is one final item. A minor encumbrance, really. A tax lien your father acquired some years ago." He slid a single, flimsy piece of paper across the desk. It looked pathetic next to the thick, bound copies of the will. He paid the property taxes on a foreclosed commercial building in a town called Havenwood. It seems he did so for several years, but the final payment for this year is overdue. The amount is $14. $14. The number hung in the air, absurd and insulting. Carol laughed, a short, sharp bark. "Oh, I remember that. Tommy's Folly. Some derelict old funeral home he got a notion about. He was always getting notions. Said it had good bones. She shook her head, a gesture of pity that was really one of contempt. The property itself is appraised at a nominal value, the lawyer added quickly. Essentially worthless. The cost to tear it down would exceed the value of the land. The county was set to seize it next week. So what happens to it? Alara asked, her eyes fixed on the paper. Carol waved a dismissive hand. Let the county have it. It's a money pit. But Richard, her weak, wavering uncle, saw an opportunity for a gesture. A cheap, meaningless gesture that might make him feel like a better man for 10 seconds. Now, Carol, he said, his voice gaining a false, magnanimous tone. It was her father's. She should have it. He pulled a wallet from his jacket, the leather creaking with importance. He extracted a $20 bill and placed it on the desk. Here, for the back taxes. A little something to get you started, Alara. The gesture was worse than the cruelty. It was a performance of generosity that cost him nothing and highlighted everything she had lost. Carol rolled her eyes but didn't object. It was, after all, a fitting final insult, giving the orphan the worthless, haunted ruin. Mr. Fields looked at Alara, an eyebrow raised in question. She thought of the alternative, a shelter, the streets, the crushing anonymity of being truly, utterly alone. This funeral home, this folly, this wreck, it was a place. It was a destination. It was something to move toward, even if it was the last stop on a road to nowhere. She reached out and took the $20 bill. Her fingers felt numb. I'll take it, she said. The lawyer nodded, making a note. He slid a small, tarnished brass key across the desk. It was heavy and ornate, a skeleton key from a forgotten time. This was in your father's effects, he said. We assume it's for the property. Alara picked up the key. It was cold and solid in her palm. It felt more real than anything else in the room. It was a key. It opened a door. It was hers. The meeting was over. Carol and Richard stood, eager to leave, to begin their new, wealthier lives. You have until tomorrow evening to vacate the premises, Carol said, not looking at Alara as she pulled on her gloves. The realtor is doing a walkthrough on Wednesday. Alara didn't answer. She walked out of the office, the key clutched in her hand, the flimsy paper with the Havenwood address in her pocket. She didn't look back. She spent the night in her childhood bedroom, but it wasn't hers anymore. It was a set. The furniture was just furniture. The walls were just walls. The ghosts of memory had already fled. She packed a single backpack with clothes. She found a sturdy cardboard box and filled it with what her aunt had called clutter. A worn copy of Moby Dick, a book on timber framing, a small, hand-carved wooden bird her father had made for her when she was 6, his things, the parts of him they couldn't appraise. The next morning, she walked out the front door for the last time, leaving the key to her old life on the kitchen counter. She did not cry. The time for that was over. Or perhaps it had not yet begun. She went to the county office, a place that smelled of stale coffee and bureaucracy. She paid the $14 in cash. The clerk, a woman with tired eyes, stamped the deed with a resounding thud. It's yours, the clerk said, with no hint of congratulations. Harmon and Son Funeral Services, 14 Chestnut Lane, Havenwood. Good luck. Alara took the paper. She now owned a derelict funeral home. She had $6 left to her name. She was homeless, and she had a home to go to. The bus ride was a long, humming purgatory. Alara sat with her forehead pressed against the cool, vibrating glass, watching the neat suburbs and strip malls of her old life bleed into the frayed edges of the countryside. The neat lawns gave way to overgrown fields. The crisp new buildings dissolved into sagging barns and rust-streaked silos. She was moving backward in time. Her backpack was on the seat beside her, a lumpy companion. The box of her father's books sat at her feet, a solid, reassuring weight. The key was in her pocket, a cold promise against her thigh. The bus sighed to a stop at a crossroads marked only by a faded sign for a town that wasn't Havenwood. "Far as I go on this route," the driver called out. "Havenwood's another 5 miles down that road, if you can call it a road." Ilara was the only one who got off. The bus pulled away with a hiss of air brakes, leaving her in a cloud of diesel fumes and profound silence. The driver was right. It was less a road and more a suggestion, 2 rutted tracks of dirt disappearing into a tunnel of overhanging trees. She hoisted the backpack onto her shoulders, bent down, and awkwardly lifted the heavy box. She began to walk. The air was different here, thick with the smell of damp earth and decaying leaves. The silence was a living thing, broken only by the buzz of insects and the frantic rustle of something small in the undergrowth. Her sneakers crunched on the gravel. The box grew heavier with every step, its corners digging into her arms. Sweat trickled down her temples. Her muscles began to ache. She stopped twice, then 3 times, setting the box down to shake the fire out of her arms. This was a pilgrimage, a penance, a slow, punishing journey to her inheritance. After what felt like hours, the trees began to thin. She saw a roofline through the leaves, steep and dark against the gray sky. Then another. She had reached the edge of town. Havenwood was not a town that was dying. It was a town that was already dead and had been for some time. Many of the houses were boarded up, their paint peeling like sunburnt skin. The ones that were still inhabited looked tired, their porches sagging, their yards filled with more weeds than grass. It was a town her father would have understood, a place with good bones, left to rot. She found Chestnut Lane easily enough. It was the most forgotten street in a forgotten town. The pavement was cracked and broken, with grass growing up through the fissures. And there it was, number 14, Harmon and Son Funeral Services. Ilara stopped. She set the box down. Her aunt's description had been an act of kindness compared to the reality. The building was a 2-story Victorian, once grand, now a Gothic nightmare. The white paint was almost entirely gone, leaving the wood beneath exposed and silvered like old bones. A shutter hung from a single hinge, banging a slow, mournful rhythm in the breeze. The porch steps had rotted through in places, and the railing listed at a drunken angle. The entire property was being slowly consumed by ivy, its green tendrils creeping over the windows and up the walls, like a tide of vegetable despair. The sign, swinging from a wrought iron bracket, was the final indignity. The letters of Harmon and Son were faded but legible. The words funeral services beneath were obscured by a thick, ugly smear of rust. This was not a house. It was a grave. The flicker of hope she had nurtured on the bus, the small, stubborn flame fed by the weight of the key, was extinguished. A wave of cold, bottomless despair washed over her. Her uncle's $20, her aunt's mocking laugh. It was a joke. The whole thing was a cruel, elaborate joke, and she was the punchline. She sank down onto the curb, her legs giving way. She put her head in her hands. The tears that had not come in the lawyer's office, or in her empty childhood room, came now. They were hot and ragged, torn from a place deep inside her. She cried for her father. She cried for the house she had lost. She cried for the utter, absolute ruin in front of her. She was 23 years old, and her life was a pile of rubble. A stray cat, skinny and gray with a torn ear, padded out from beneath a hydrangea bush. It watched her with intelligent green eyes, then sat down a few feet away, tucked its paws beneath its chest, and began to wash its face, utterly unconcerned with her grief. The sight was so absurd, so mundane, that it broke the spell. Ilara's sobs subsided into shuddering breaths. She wiped her face with the back of her hand, leaving a smear of dirt on her cheek. The cat finished its grooming and looked at her again, as if to say, "Are you done?" She got to her feet. Crying wouldn't fix the roof. Crying wouldn't patch the steps. Crying wouldn't get her out of the coming night. She picked up the box and walked carefully up the overgrown path to the front porch. She tested the steps before putting her weight on them, finding the solid spots, avoiding the rot. The porch groaned but held. The front door was massive, made of dark, heavy oak. The brass doorknob was tarnished green, but the keyhole was clear. She pulled the skeleton key from her pocket. It slid into the lock with a satisfying, metallic whisper. She turned it. The lock was stiff from disuse. She had to put her shoulder into it, gritting her teeth. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, with a deep, echoing clunk that sounded like a bone breaking, the mechanism turned. The door swung inward on silent, perfectly balanced hinges. That was the first sign. She stepped inside, into a cloud of dust, and the thick, sweet smell of decay and old paper. The air was still and heavy. Light struggled through the grime-caked windows of the foyer, illuminating a world draped in cobwebs and shrouded in dust cloths. It was a wreck, a disaster. But she looked down. The floorboards beneath the filth were hardwood, wide planks of what looked like oak or maple. They were laid perfectly, with no gaps, no warping. She scraped a small patch clean with the toe of her sneaker. The wood beneath was pale and beautiful. She looked at the grand staircase that swept up to the second floor. The banister was coated in dust, but it was carved from a single, continuous piece of walnut, its lines flowing and graceful. The newel post at its base was a heavy, square block of wood, and carved into its surface was a simple, elegant bird in flight. It was the same bird her father had carved for her as a child. Her breath caught in her throat. She ran her hand over the carving, her fingers tracing the familiar lines. This was his work. She knew it the way she knew the sound of his voice. She moved through the downstairs rooms, her despair slowly, cautiously giving way to a dawning sense of awe. The viewing parlor, the family waiting room, the small office at the back, they were all filled with junk and debris, but the rooms themselves were perfect. She ran her hand along a wall. It was perfectly plumb. She looked at the joinery where the wall met the ceiling. No cracks, no settling. The plaster, where it wasn't water damaged from a leak in the roof, was smooth as glass. Her father's voice echoed in her memory, a low murmur from years of watching him work. A thing isn't ruined just because it's broken. You look at the bones. The bones have to be good. Carol had said he called it a place with good bones. She had meant it as an insult, a sign of his foolishness. She had been wrong. This was not a ruin. This was a masterpiece, left unfinished and neglected. The decay was a skin. Beneath it, the structure was sound, strong, waiting. Her father had been here. He had worked here. He had poured his skill and his love into this derelict building, for a reason she couldn't yet understand. This wasn't a joke. It was a secret. A flicker of hope, stubborn and small, ignited once more in the cold, hollow space in her chest. It was a tiny light in a vast darkness, but it was enough to see by. She went back to the foyer and picked up the box of his books. She carried it into the small back office and set it on the dusty desk. This was home. The first priority was light. The second was cleaning. She spent what was left of the afternoon wrestling with the boarded-up windows. The nails were old and rusted, but her father had taught her how to use a pry bar. She didn't have one, so she used the claw of a heavy, discarded hammer she found in what was once a coat closet. The boards came away with a screech of protest, showering her with rust and splinters. Light, gray and watery, spilled into the rooms, revealing the full extent of the filth, but also chasing away the deepest shadows. She started in the small back office. It was the most manageable space. She used a tattered remnant of a dustcloth to wipe down the desk, the chair, a built-in bookshelf. Dust plumed in the air, thick and acrid. It coated her clothes, her hair, the inside of her nose. She worked until her arms ached and the sun began to set. casting long, distorted shadows through the newly cleared windows. She had no food, no water, no electricity. She found a bucket and, after checking the yard, located an old hand pump well near the back of the property. The handle was stiff, but after several minutes of violent, squealing complaint, water gushed out. It was rusty at first, then ran clear and cold. It tasted of iron and earth, the best water she had ever had. She drank until her stomach hurt, then filled the bucket and carried it inside. She washed her face and hands, the cold water a shocking relief. For dinner, she had nothing. For a bed, she had the dusty floor. She cleared a space in the office, lay her backpack down as a pillow, and pulled her jacket over her. The house was silent around her. It was a deep, ancient silence, the silence of a place that had held too much grief and was now empty of it. The gray cat appeared in the doorway, a silent shadow. It looked at her, then leaped gracefully onto the windowsill, curled into a tight ball, and went to sleep, her guard. Alara lay in the dark, listening to the house settle around her. It did not groan or creak like a dying thing. It made small, solid sounds, the sounds of a strong frame settling into its foundation. The house held. She slept, a deep, dreamless, and profound sleep. The next morning, she woke up stiff and cold, but with a clear purpose. She needed supplies, she needed tools, she needed food, and she needed information. She left her meager belongings in the office, trusting the cat to stand watch, and walked back into the center of Havenwood. The town looked even more forlorn in the morning light. The few people she saw on the street averted their eyes, unused to strangers. She passed a diner with steamy windows, the smell of bacon and coffee making her stomach clench with hunger. She passed a closed-down cinema, a grocery store with more empty shelves than full ones. At the end of the main street, she found it. Silas's Hardware and Sundries. The sign was hand-painted, the letters faded but neat. The windows were crammed with a chaotic assortment of tools, plumbing fixtures, and seed packets. It smelled of metal, oil, and old wood. It smelled like her father's workshop. An old bell chimed as she pushed the door open. The man behind the counter was as old and weathered as the store itself. He was tall and wiry, with a shock of white hair and a face carved into a permanent expression of shrewd skepticism. He wore a canvas work apron over a flannel shirt. He was polishing a pair of pruning shears with an oily rag. He looked up as she came in, his pale blue eyes giving her a quick, thorough once-over. The worn backpack, the dirty clothes, the city look of her. He said nothing. "Hello," Alara said, her voice small in the cluttered space. "I need a few things. A pry bar, some heavy-duty trash bags, a bucket." The man grunted. He jerked his head toward the back of the store. "Aisles are marked. Bring it up here when you find it." He went back to his shears. She was dismissed. Alara wandered the narrow aisles. They were packed to the ceiling with everything a person could possibly need to hold a world together. Screws and nails in 1,000 sizes, rolls of wire, stacks of sandpaper. She found a sturdy pry bar, a roll of thick black bags, a galvanized steel bucket. She also found a block of lye soap and a stiff-bristled scrub brush. She brought them all to the counter. The man tallied the prices on a notepad with a stub of a pencil. $19.50, he said, without looking up. Alara's heart sank. She had $6. She had nothing to sell, nothing to offer. I don't have that right now," she admitted, the words tasting like shame. "I can pay you later. I'm good for it." The man stopped writing. He slowly lifted his head, and his eyes were cold. "This ain't a charity, miss. Nothing in this world is free." "I know," she said, her voice gaining a desperate edge. "I just moved into a place down on Chestnut Lane. I can work. I can clean, or stock shelves, or—" At the mention of Chestnut Lane, a flicker of something changed in his expression. The skepticism remained, but it was joined by curiosity. "Chestnut Lane. Ain't nothing down there but the old Miller place and the funeral home." He paused, his eyes narrowing. "You ain't the one who bought the old Harmon place?" "Yes," she said. It was my father's." The man put down his pencil. He leaned forward, his hands flat on the counter. He stared at her, really looked at her for the first time. He looked at her eyes, her jawline. "Your father?" he asked, his voice low. "Who was your father?" "Thomas Harmon." The name fell into the silence of the store like a heavy tool dropping onto a concrete floor. The man's entire demeanor shifted. The coldness in his eyes vanished, replaced by a complex storm of emotions she couldn't decipher. Recognition, sadness, anger. "Thomas Harmon," he repeated, his voice a hoarse whisper. "Well, I'll be damned." He was silent for a long moment, just looking at her. "You're Thomas's girl," he said. It wasn't a question. It was a statement of fact, a discovery. "I'm Silas," he said, extending a calloused, oil-stained hand across the counter. "I knew your father." Alara shook his hand. His grip was like iron. "He was a good man," Silas said, his eyes distant. "A damn good man. And a craftsman like no other. Stubborn as a mule, but his heart was true." He looked at the pile of supplies on the counter. Then he looked back at her. "That place has been empty for years. Since he had to leave town." "Leave town?" Alara asked. "He lived with me, near the city." Silas shook his head, a sad, bitter motion. "Before that, this was his family's business, Harmon and Son, his father and him. When the old man died, Thomas's sister, Carol, she and her husband wanted to sell out to a big chain. Quick cash. Thomas wouldn't have it. Said the business was about dignity, not volume." The story was coming into focus, the missing pieces clicking into place. "They forced him out," Silas said, his voice laced with old anger. "Legal tricks. Said he was incompetent. They took his name, his livelihood. He fought 'em for a while, but they had the money and the lawyers. He left town with nothing but his tools and what was in his pockets. Heard he got a job in construction downstate." "But the funeral home," Alara prompted. "That was his revenge, I guess. Or his hope. The business went bust a few years after he left. Carol ran it into the ground. The bank foreclosed. It sat empty for a decade. Then, about 5 years back, I see in the county paper that someone's been paying the back taxes, keeping it from being seized. I had a feeling it was him. Thomas wasn't the kind of man to let a good building die, even if it held bad memories." Silas looked at her, and his eyes were kind. "He was working on it, on weekends mostly. He'd drive up, buy lumber, supplies. Never said what he was doing, just said he was getting it right. For a while there, I hadn't seen him in a year or so. I was worried. Then I heard he'd passed." He fell silent, the weight of the unspoken hanging between them. "He was a good man," Silas said again, softly. "He fixed my roof one year after a storm. Wouldn't take a dime. Said a neighbor's a neighbor. Paid me in tomatoes from his garden for a month." He looked at her worn clothes, and the hunger she couldn't hide in her eyes. "You're his daughter. You're a neighbor." He pushed the pile of supplies toward her. "Take 'em," he said. "And this." He walked over to a shelf and came back with a box of crackers, a jar of peanut butter, and a bag of apples. "And this." He opened a drawer and pulled out a heavy-duty flashlight and a package of batteries. "I can't," Alara started. "It's not a gift," Silas said gruffly, cutting her off. "It's a tab. Your father's credit is good here, always was, always will be." He started packing everything into a set of canvas bags. "You'll need more. Tarps for the roof, plywood for the windows. You tell me what you need, and I'll get it. You can work it off here in the store when you get on your feet." Tears pricked at Alara's eyes, but these were different. They weren't tears of grief or despair. They were tears of gratitude, so sharp and overwhelming it felt like pain. "Thank you," she whispered. "Don't thank me," Silas said, not meeting her eye. "Thank your father. He was the one who built the credit. You're just drawing on the account." She left the store with her arms full and her heart fuller. The food, the tools, the light. They were more than just objects. They were a connection, a validation, a lifeline thrown to her from the past by a man she barely knew, in the name of a father she was only just beginning to understand. Back at the funeral home, she ate standing in the dusty kitchen, wolfing down crackers and peanut butter like a starving animal. The food was fuel. The story was a map. Her father hadn't abandoned this place. He had been reclaiming it. Energized, she went back to the office. She looked at the carved newel post, at the solid walls. He had been working here, hiding his work perhaps, keeping it secret from the family that had betrayed him. If he was hiding his work, maybe he was hiding other things too. She started in the office, the most likely place. She ran her hands along the built-in bookshelves, tapping the wood, listening for a hollow sound. Nothing. She checked the desk, pulling out the empty drawers, feeling underneath. Nothing. She looked at the floor, wide oak planks, just like the foyer. She remembered her father telling her once, "The best place to hide something is where everyone looks, but no one sees." She got down on her hands and knees. She started at one end of the room, examining each board. They were tight, seamless. But near the wall, under the shadow of the desk, one board looked different. The nails at its end were not countersunk like the others. They were flush with the surface, and the grain didn't quite match its neighbor. Her heart began to beat faster. She took the new pry bar. She carefully inserted the flat end into the hairline crack between the boards. She wedged it in, gently, then put her weight on it. The board groaned. The nails squealed. It lifted. Beneath it was a dark, rectangular cavity, lined with tar paper to keep out the damp. And nestled inside were two thick, leather-bound books. They weren't books. They were ledgers, the kind her father used to use for his business accounts. But these were different. The leather was soft and worn. She lifted the top one out. It was heavy. She opened it. The page was filled with her father's handwriting. It was a dense, neat script, the handwriting of a man who measured twice and cut once. The entry at the top of the page was dated 5 years ago, June 14th. Paid the taxes. The place is mine again. Or it will be, for her. The foundation is good. The frame is straight. But the rot is deep. It will take time. But I have time. Alara's hands were shaking. She turned the page. July 2nd. Started on the roof. South side is worst. A house must be dry. A life must be dry. Can't let the rot in. Strip the old shingles. Wood underneath is sound. Good old growth pine. They don't make them like this anymore. She flipped through the pages. It was a journal, a logbook, a testament. Page after page of notes on the house, diagrams of joinery, lists of materials, costs of lumber. But woven in between the practical details were other entries. September 10th. Thinking of Alara today. She's 16. Smart as a whip. Her aunt fills her head with poison about her mother, about me. I can't fight it with words. I have to fight it with this. A place for her. A place that is true. December 1st. Finished the newel post. Carved the bird. The same one I made for her when she was small. Wonder if she still has it. Hope she does. A thing isn't ruined just because it's broken. It can be mended. A family, too. Maybe. March 22nd. The house is quiet. It holds its secrets well. So will I. This is for you, Ellie. A foundation. A roof over your head. A place to stand, where no one can push you off. It was the legacy document. It was a letter written over years, in sawdust and sweat and love. It was a map of the house and a map of his heart. He hadn't been building a house. He had been building a fortress for her, a sanctuary, an inheritance not of money, but of substance, of work, of truth. She sat on the dusty floor, the ledger open in her lap, the flashlight beam illuminating the words. The sun went down, and the house grew dark around her, but she didn't notice. She had found the instructions. She knew what she had to do. The work began. The ledger was her guide. Her father's words, written in his neat, steady hand, became her catechism. A house must be dry. The roof. It all started with the roof. The leaks had stained the ceilings in the upstairs bedrooms, ugly brown maps of decay. To fix the inside, she first had to secure the outside. Silas delivered a roll of heavy black tar paper and several large tarps. "This'll keep the water out for now," he said, his voice gruff. "The real fix is shingles, but that's a bigger job." She found an old wooden ladder in the carriage house out back. It was weathered but solid, another piece of her father's careful work. She propped it against the side of the house and climbed. The world looked different from the roof. She could see the whole of Havenwood, the sad, quiet houses, the church steeple, the dark green expanse of the woods beyond. The funeral home was the tallest building on the street, a lonely sentinel. The roof was a treacherous landscape of crumbling shingles and soft spots. She moved carefully, testing each step, staying on the rafters she could feel through the soles of her sneakers. Her father's journal had a diagram of the roof structure, a map of the strong and weak places. She followed it. She spent 3 days on that roof, 3 days of grueling, terrifying work. She tore away the rottenest sections of shingles with the pry bar, the sharp edges cutting her hands. She unrolled the heavy tar paper, fighting the wind that tried to rip it from her grasp. She tacked it down with a hammer and roofing nails from Silas's store, the rhythmic banging a conversation with the silence. Her shoulders ached. Her back screamed. Her hands were a mess of blisters and cuts. At the end of each day, she would climb down the ladder, exhausted and filthy, and pump cold, clear water from the well to wash away the grime. On the 3rd day, as she was finishing the last section, a voice called up to her. "You're going to kill yourself up there." Alara looked down. An older woman stood in the overgrown yard, her hands on her hips. She had a kind, wrinkled face and sharp, intelligent eyes that missed nothing. She was holding a covered basket. "I'm fine," Alara called down, her voice hoarse from dust and disuse. "You're not fine. You're a stiff breeze away from breaking your neck," the woman retorted. "Come down from there. It's lunchtime." Alara hesitated, then slowly, carefully, made her way to the ladder and climbed down. "I'm Martha," the woman said, setting the basket on the rickety porch. "I run the diner. I was a friend of your father's." Like Silas, she said it with a quiet pride. "A friend of your father's. It was a credential in this town." "Alara," she replied, wiping a sweaty, tar-streaked hand on her jeans before shaking Martha's outstretched one. Martha looked her up and down, taking in the ripped clothes, the exhaustion in her eyes. "Thomas would be proud," she said softly, "and he'd be furious you were doing this alone." She uncovered the basket. The smell of fried chicken and fresh bread rose up, so rich and wonderful it made Alara dizzy. There was also a thermos of hot coffee and a thick slice of apple pie. "Eat," Martha commanded. "You can't rebuild the world on an empty stomach." They sat on the porch steps, Alara devouring the food like a wolf. Martha watched her with a gentle, maternal gaze. "Thomas used to talk about you all the time," Martha said, her voice nostalgic. "Said you had his hands, but your mother's spirit. Said you were a force of nature." "You knew my mother?" Alara asked, her mouth full of chicken. Martha's smile faded slightly. "I knew of her. She wasn't here long. A city girl. Pretty as a picture, but fragile. This town and Thomas's family, they weren't kind to her. She trailed off, as if deciding not to say more. Instead, she talked about Thomas. She told stories of him fixing the church organ, of building bookshelves for the tiny town library, of the time he spent a week carving a new sign for her diner after the old one blew down in a storm. Each story was a small, bright tile fitting into the mosaic of the man she was just starting to know. He wasn't just a quiet, sad father who worked too much. He was a pillar, a hidden, unacknowledged pillar of this quiet, sad town. From that day on, Martha became a fixture in her life. She would appear every day around noon, a basket in her hand, a story on her lips. She brought food, but she also brought wisdom. She showed Elira how to make a poultice for her cuts from plantain leaves in the yard. She brought old curtains from the diner, which they washed in the bucket and hung in the office, a small, crucial touch of home. Martha was the second ally, the nurturer, the wise elder. Word spread through Havenwood's quiet grapevine. The girl in the old Harmon place, Thomas Harmon's daughter, she was fixing it up, alone. One evening, a pickup truck rattled to a stop outside. A man in his 50s with a kind face and a plumber's wrench in his back pocket got out. "You Elira?" he asked. She nodded. "I'm Bill, Martha's son. Heard you ain't got running water. Your dad once fixed my furnace in the middle of January for the price of a handshake. Figure I owe him." He spent the next 2 days in the damp, spidery crawl space, replacing cracked pipes, his cursing a comforting, industrious sound. On the second evening, he came upstairs, wiping his hands on a rag. "Give the kitchen tap a try," he said. Elira went to the sink, her heart pounding. She turned the tarnished brass handle. There was a shudder, a groan, a loud bang from the pipes, then a sputtering stream of rusty water, which slowly, miraculously, ran clear. Running water. She cupped her hands under the stream, cool and clean. It was a miracle, a victory so profound she wanted to weep. Progress. Small, but real. The community began to rally, not in a grand gesture, but in a series of small, quiet contributions. A retired electrician named George, whose eyesight was failing but whose knowledge was encyclopedic, came by and walked her through the fuse box, showing her which wires were safe and which were a death trap. He helped her get a single circuit working, enough for a lamp in the office and a hot plate. Silas delivered a used water heater. "Something another customer was throwing out, still works," he mumbled, refusing to meet her eye. An elderly woman brought a box of mismatched plates and cutlery. A farmer dropped off a crate of vegetables. Each person came with a story about her father. "He helped me pull my car out of a ditch. He taught my boy how to make a dovetail joint. He listened." The house was slowly coming back to life, not just from her work, but from the collective memory of a man they had not forgotten. It was being rebuilt with wood and nails and wire, but also with kindness and reciprocity. And the cat, the skinny gray stray, never left. Martha told her it used to follow Thomas around whenever he was in town. Elira named him Gage for the precision of his movements. He was a silent, graceful companion, a living link to the man who had started it all. He would sit on a dusty windowsill, watching her work, his presence a quiet, constant reassurance. She was not alone anymore. She was part of something. She had found her father's other family, a family of circumstance and shared respect, bound by acts of service, not by blood. She had lost a family and a house. She was gaining a home and a community. If you've made it this far into Elira's story, hit subscribe, because what happens next is the part I've been waiting to tell you. The work was a rhythm. Wake, work, eat, sleep. The house was changing. The downstairs was clean. The windows were patched with plywood where the glass was broken, but they were weather-tight. The office was a small island of order, with a working lamp, a hot plate, and the ledgers open on the desk. But there was one part of the house she avoided, one part her father's journal had mentioned only once, in a cryptic entry near the end of the first volume. The heart of the house is in the casket room. Don't be afraid of the name. It's just a room. The most important room. Everything ends there, and everything begins there. The key is in the work. The casket room. It was at the back of the house, past the viewing parlors, with a separate entrance to the outside for discreet removals. The door was thick, heavy oak, and it was locked. The ornate brass key she had been given in the lawyer's office did not fit. She had tried the handle. It was solid. She had pushed against the door. It didn't budge. It was a place of finality, and it felt sealed. She was afraid of it, afraid of the name, afraid of what a funeral home's casket room might contain after years of neglect. Her imagination, fueled by exhaustion and the gothic gloom of the house, conjured up grim possibilities. But her father's words echoed in her mind. The key is in the work. What did that mean? She was sweeping the main foyer one afternoon, clearing away the last of the thickest dust, when she found it. Near the base of the wall, close to the door of the casket room, was a small, almost invisible brass plate set into the floorboards. It was no bigger than a silver dollar, tarnished to a dark brown. She knelt down, her heart starting to beat a little faster. She cleaned the plate with her sleeve. There was an inscription on it, a tiny, perfect rendering of a key. She pressed on it. Nothing. She tried to pry it up. It was flush with the wood. She went back to the ledger, searching for a clue. She found a page of diagrams, complex drawings of gears and levers. It looked like the inside of a clock. The title at the top of the page was The Foyer Lock. Beneath the diagrams were instructions. The house remembers. The work is the key. First, the newel post, the bird's eye. Then, the third step of the main stair, the loose riser. Finally, the keystone in the arch above the main door. The heart of the house opens to a knowing hand. It was a puzzle, a sequence, a test. She went to the newel post first, her hand tracing the carved bird. She looked closely at its head. The eye was not carved wood. It was a small, dark knot, almost black. She pressed it. It clicked, sinking a fraction of an inch into the wood with a soft, satisfying sound. Step 1. She moved to the grand staircase. The third step. She counted up. 1, 2, 3. She knelt down and examined the riser, the vertical board beneath the tread. It looked solid, but when she pushed on the right side, it gave slightly. She pushed harder, and a small section swung inward on a hidden hinge, revealing a dark cavity. Inside was a small brass lever. She pulled it. A faint thunk echoed from the direction of the front door. Step 2. Finally, the archway over the front door. It was made of magnificent, heavy timbers, joined in a perfect curve. The center stone, the keystone, was a block of wood carved with a simple floral pattern. She had to stand on a chair to reach it. She ran her hands over it, feeling for a seam, a button, a trick. Nothing. She reread the journal, the keystone in the arch. She looked closer. The floral carving wasn't just decorative. It was a pattern of 5 petals around a central point. She tried pressing the petals. Nothing. She tried turning the center. It wouldn't move. Frustrated, she leaned her head against the cool wood. The heart of the house opens to a knowing hand. His hand. What would he have done? She thought of his hands. Calloused, strong, surprisingly gentle. She thought of how he held a chisel, how he measured a piece of wood. She thought of the bird he carved for her. She pulled the small wooden bird from her pocket, where she always kept it now. She looked at the carving on the keystone. Then she looked at the bird in her hand. The shape of the petals. It wasn't a flower. It was the negative space created by 5 birds in flight, their wings touching, and the center of the flower was a small, hexagonal hole. She looked at the base of the wooden bird in her hand. Protruding from it was a tiny, hexagonal peg of wood. It was how it had once attached to a small stand he had made. It was a key. Her hand was trembling as she reached up and fitted the bird's base into the hole. It slid in perfectly. She turned it a quarter turn to the right. There was a loud, deep clunk from the back of the house. It was the sound of a heavy bolt sliding home. The casket room door was unlocked. She stood for a moment, her heart hammering against her ribs. This was it, the heart of the house. She walked slowly to the door. She put her hand on the cold brass knob and turned. It moved easily. She pushed the door open. The room was not dark. Light streamed in from two large, clean windows that looked out onto the back garden. The air did not smell of decay. It smelled of cedar and linseed oil and cool metal. It was not a casket room. It was a workshop. It was pristine. A long, heavy workbench ran the length of one wall, its surface smooth and oiled. Above it, tools hung in perfect order on a pegboard wall. Chisels and gouges arranged by size, handsaws with gleaming teeth, a row of wooden-bodied planes that shone with a deep patina. Against the other wall stood the machines, a heavy cast-iron table saw, a drill press, a lathe. They were old, but impeccably maintained, their metal surfaces coated in a thin, protective layer of oil. They were her father's master tools, the ones her aunt had claimed, the ones she thought had been sold off. He had hidden them here. He had built a secret room, a vault, and filled it with the best parts of himself. And in the center of the room, where the caskets would have been displayed, sat one large, long chest. It was the size and shape of a coffin, but it was not morbid. It was beautiful. It was made of glowing, honey-colored cypress wood, joined with exquisite dovetails at the corners. The surface was polished to a satin sheen. A single, small, carved bird, identical to the one on the newel post, adorned its lid. This was what her father's journal had meant. Everything ends there, and everything begins there. She approached it almost reverently. There was no lock. She lifted the heavy lid. Inside, nestled on a bed of dark green velvet, were not the grisly remains she had feared. It was an arsenal of hope. There were more tools, his finest, most delicate carving instruments, each in its own felt-lined slot. There were stacks of new, unopened ledgers, identical to the ones she had found. There were rolled-up architectural drawings, plans for the house, for furniture he intended to build. And on top of it all was a single, thick manila envelope. She lifted it out. Her name was on it, written in his hand. Ilara. Inside was a sheaf of papers. She pulled them out. The top page was the official deed to the Harmon Funeral Home. It was not the flimsy, tax-delinquent paper she had received. This was a proper, notarized quit-claim deed, legally transferring ownership of the property to a trust. A trust named the Havenwood Project. The sole beneficiary of the trust, Ilara Harmon. The document was dated 2 years ago. He had legally insulated the property and her inheritance of it from his estate, from his sister, from everyone. He had made it untouchable. She sank to her knees on the clean workshop floor, the deed clutched in her hand. The sheer, breathtaking scope of his planning, his foresight, his love, was overwhelming. He had foreseen this. He had known his sister's greed would leave Ilara with nothing, and he had spent years building her this ark, this lifeboat, and hiding the key to it in plain sight. A sound from outside broke her trance. The crunch of tires on the gravel of the lane. A car door slamming. Voices. One of the voices was sharp, imperious, and sickeningly familiar. Aunt Carol. Ilara stood up, her shock instantly replaced by a cold, hard anger. She walked out of the workshop, leaving the door ajar, the beautiful cypress chest gleaming within. She walked through the house, the deed held tight in her hand. She reached the front door just as her aunt came marching up the porch steps, a portly man in a suit trailing behind her. Carol stopped short when she saw Ilara in the doorway. Her expression soured. "What are you still doing here?" Carol demanded. "I told you to be out weeks ago. This property is part of the estate." "No, it's not," Alara said. Her voice was quiet, but it was as solid as the foundation of the house. Carol laughed her short, ugly laugh. "Don't be ridiculous. It was Tommy's folly. It's ours now. This is Mr. Peterson. He's a developer. He's going to do us the favor of tearing this eyesore down." The man in the suit gave Alara a dismissive nod. "The land has some value. Cleared," he said, as if she were a squatter to be placated. "You can't," Alara said. "Oh, I can," Carol sneered. "I have the will. I have the power of attorney. This place and everything in it belongs to me, including, I might add," she said, her eyes narrowing greedily as she peered past Alara into the clean foyer, "whatever improvements you seem to have made with what I can only assume is my money." The accusation was so audacious, so completely backward, that Alara almost laughed. Instead, she held up the deed. "This property was placed in a private trust 2 years ago," she said, her voice ringing with newfound authority. "The sole beneficiary is me. You have no claim to it. You have no right to be here." Carol's face went pale. She stared at the paper in Alara's hand, her mind scrambling to process the information. "A trust? That's not possible. It was in his name." "It was," Alara agreed. "And he, as the legal owner, put it in a trust to protect it from you." The truth of it hit Carol like a physical blow. She staggered back a step. The developer, Mr. Peterson, looked from Carol to Alara, his expression shifting from confidence to annoyance. He was a man who hated complications. "Is this true?" he asked Carol. Carol's face was a mask of fury. She had been outmaneuvered, outsmarted by the brother she'd always dismissed as a simple-minded fool. "He couldn't have," she hissed, her voice venomous. "He wasn't that smart." "He was," Alara said quietly. "He was a craftsman. He planned. He measured. He built things to last." She took a step forward, no longer a frightened girl in a lawyer's office, but the master of her own house. "This is my property," she said, her voice low and steady. "Get off it." For a moment, Carol looked like she might argue, might scream, might lunge, but the fight was gone from her eyes. She was defeated. The deed in Alara's hand was an unbreachable wall. She turned, her movements stiff with rage, and stomped back down the steps. "This isn't over," she spat over her shoulder, but the threat was hollow. It was over. She had lost. Mr. Peterson gave Alara an irritated look, then scurried after Carol. Their car door slammed, the engine roared to life, and they sped away, leaving a cloud of dust and impotent fury behind them. Alara stood in the doorway, the deed in her hand, and watched them go. The house was silent behind her. The house held. She had won. Weeks passed. The confrontation with her aunt faded, leaving behind not triumph, but a quiet, settled peace. The legal victory was less important than the personal one. She had stood her ground on her own foundation. The discovery of the workshop changed everything. She now had her father's tools, his real legacy. She began to work not just on the house, but in it. She spent hours at the workbench, learning the feel of the tools. She practiced cuts on scrap wood, repeating the exercises she remembered from his journal. The smell of fresh-cut cedar filled the air, chasing out the last ghosts of decay. Her life found a new rhythm. Mornings were for the house, patching plaster, sanding floors, glazing windows. Afternoons were for the workshop, studying her father's plans, learning his craft. Evenings were for the journals, reading his words by the light of the single lamp in her office. One crisp autumn evening, another vehicle pulled into her lane. It wasn't her aunt's expensive sedan. It was an old, battered pickup truck that looked vaguely familiar. A man got out. He was younger than her aunt and uncle, maybe in his early 30s, with a defeated slump to his shoulders. It took her a moment to place him. It was David, Carol's son, her cousin. He had stood silently behind his mother at family gatherings, always looking uncomfortable. Ilara's hand tightened on the handle of the hammer she was holding. She stood on the porch, waiting. He didn't come to the door. He stood by his truck, his hands in his pockets, looking at the house. He looked tired and much older than she remembered. "It looks good," he called out. His voice was rough. Ilara didn't reply. "My mother," he started, then stopped. "She's not happy. The developer pulled out. She's talking to lawyers, but they all say the same thing. It's yours." "I know," Ilara said. He kicked at a loose stone on the ground. "They sold the house, your dad's house, got a lot for it. The money, it's gone. Most of it. A bad investment my dad made. It's all gone." There was no pleasure in hearing it, no sense of vindication, just a weary sadness. The greed had consumed them, as it always did. "I'm sorry," she said, and was surprised to find that she meant it. He finally looked at her. There was shame in his eyes. "I never liked what they did. To Uncle Thomas. To you. But I never said anything. I was weak." He shook his head. "I took some of the money from the tool sale. I bought this truck. Now I can't even afford the gas for it." They stood in silence for a moment. "I heard you were fixing the place up," he said. "Alone." "Not alone," she corrected him. "I have help." He nodded, looking toward the town. I know how to sand floors," he said. The offer so quiet she almost didn't hear it. "I worked a summer for a flooring company. I'm not asking for anything. Just, I want to do something. One thing, right." Ilara looked at him. He was not his mother. He was his father, Richard. Weak, easily led, but with a flicker of something decent buried deep inside. A thing isn't ruined just because it's broken. She thought of her father. He had fixed things for people who didn't deserve it. He had helped neighbors. He had acted out of a sense of his own integrity, not their merit. "The dining room floor needs doing," she said. "The sander is in the workshop. I start at 7 tomorrow morning." A flicker of relief, so profound it was almost painful, crossed David's face. He nodded, unable to speak. He got back in his truck and drove away. The next morning, at 5 minutes to 7, his truck was back. He worked all day, enveloped in a cloud of sawdust, the roar of the sander filling the house. He never spoke. He refused Martha's offer of lunch, eating a squashed sandwich he had brought himself. He worked for 3 days. When he was done, the dining room floor was a swath of pale, perfect, raw wood, ready for stain. He packed up the sander, cleaned it meticulously, and put it back in the workshop. "I'm done," he said, standing at the door, refusing to come in. "It's good work," Ilara said. He just nodded. "I'm selling the truck. Going to try and find work out west." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a crumpled roll of bills. "It's not much. From the sale. It's yours." He set the money on the porch railing and walked away before she could refuse it. He got in his truck and drove off down the lane, not looking back. It was not forgiveness. It was not redemption. It was a small act of atonement. A single, well-sanded floor in a house full of ghosts. Ilara left the money on the railing. An hour later, she saw Martha walk by, pause, and quietly pocket it. The next day, a brand new set of carving chisels appeared on her workbench. The town had its own ways of balancing the books. Winter came to Havenwood. A light dusting snow covered the ground, outlining the stark branches of the trees. The house was weather-tight now, the work of the autumn paying off. With the help of Silas and Bill the plumber, she had gotten the old cast-iron radiators working, and a gentle, hissing warmth filled the downstairs rooms. Life had a comfortable, quiet routine. She worked in the town, a few hours each day at Silas's store to pay off her tab, and a few hours at Martha's diner to earn money for groceries. The rest of her time was for the house. The cypress chest in the workshop was her ark, her treasure box. She had explored its contents thoroughly, cataloging her father's plans, his tools, his dreams. There were more ledgers at the bottom, older ones, and tucked into the very last one, in a pocket sewn into the leather cover, was a sealed envelope. It was different from the others. It was heavy cream-colored paper, the kind used for important letters. Her name was not on it. Instead, in her father's script, were the words, "For when you're ready to know the rest." She had left it there for weeks, both drawn to it and afraid of it. She sensed that whatever was inside was the final secret, the one he had hidden most deeply. One snowy evening, with Gage the cat purring on her lap and the house filled with the warm, gentle hiss of the radiators, she decided she was ready. She retrieved the envelope from the workshop. Her hands were steady as she broke the wax seal, which was impressed with the same bird emblem. Inside was a letter, not pages from a ledger, but a true letter, several pages long, written on the same cream-colored paper. The handwriting was her father's, but it was different, less the neat script of a craftsman, more the hurried scrawl of a man pouring out his heart. "My dearest Ilara," it began, "if you are reading this, it means you have found my secret place. It means you have followed the path I laid for you. It means you are strong, and you are home. I am so proud of you. There is one last thing you need to know, one last piece of the story that I have kept from you, because the truth of it is heavy, and I did not want you to carry it until you had a strong foundation beneath your feet. It is about your mother." Ilara's breath caught. Her mother. A ghost. A half-remembered scent of lavender. A story told by her aunt of a flighty, selfish woman who had run off, abandoning her husband and child for a new life. The story you were told is a lie. It is a cruel lie, told by cruel people to protect their own pride. Your mother, Lena, did not abandon us. She was sent away. She was a wonderful woman, Ilara, full of light and laughter. She was an artist. She saw beauty everywhere. When she came here, to this town, to my family, that light began to dim. My sister, Carol, was jealous of her. My father, a hard man, saw her gentleness as weakness. They were cruel to her, in small ways at first, then in larger ones. They criticized her art, her clothes, her city ways. They tried to remake her into their own image, and when she resisted, they decided she was an enemy. After you were born, she fell into a deep sadness, a sickness of the spirit. We know the name for it now, postpartum depression. But then, here, it was just seen as a moral failing, as weakness. I tried to help her, but I was young and didn't understand. My family offered no support. They said she was being dramatic. They said she was unfit to be a mother. She needed help, real help. A doctor in the city, a quiet place to recover. I begged my father for money to get her that help. He refused. Carol told him it was money down the drain. They said if she was to leave, she should not come back. They gave me an ultimatum: my wife, or my inheritance, my place in the family business. I was a coward, Ilara. It is the great shame of my life. I thought I could fix it. I thought I could make them see reason. I let them send her away. I drove her to the bus station myself, with $100 in her pocket, and a promise that I would follow as soon as I could, as soon as I had sorted things out. I promised her I would bring you, but I never did. I stayed, trying to fight them, trying to secure our future, and they used that time to poison you against her. They told you she had left. They intercepted her letters. They told me she had stopped writing. They built a wall of lies between us, and by the time I realized it, it was too late. I had lost her, and then they forced me out, just as they had forced her out. I spent years looking for her, but she had disappeared. I think she didn't want to be found. I think I broke her heart, and she built a new life out of the pieces. I don't blame her. This house, this project, it was my penance. It was my attempt to build the home I should have given her, the home I should have fought for. I built it for you, so you would have a place that was true, a place that could never be taken from you, a place founded on work and love, not on greed and lies. She did not leave you. She loved you more than anything. I failed her. I failed you both. I hope, in this house, you can find it in your heart to forgive me. There is one last thing. Tucked in with this letter is the only thing I have left of her. An old address for her sister in Oregon. It is a long shot, a ghost of a chance. I was always too afraid, too ashamed to use it. But you are not me. You are stronger. Whatever you choose to do, know that I love you. Know that she loved you. Your father, Thomas. The letter fell from her hands. The room was silent, save for the hiss of the radiator and the purring of the cat. The story of her life, the bedrock of her own personal history, had just crumbled into dust. The anger she had carried for years toward her absent mother, it was a phantom. It was a lie constructed by her aunt. The pain of abandonment was replaced by a new, more complex sorrow. A sorrow for her mother, alone and grieving. A sorrow for her father, trapped by his own weakness and sense of duty. A sorrow for the family they could have been. She was not the daughter of an abandoning mother and a sad, passive father. She was the daughter of a woman who had been broken, and a man who had spent the rest of his life trying to build something that could never be broken again. It changed everything. She looked at the small slip of paper that had fallen out with the letter. An address, a name, Eleanor Vance, and a street in Portland, Oregon. It was 20 years old. A ghost of a chance, her father had called it. For a long time, she did nothing. She sat with the new, heavy truth, letting it settle. She grieved for the mother she never knew, and for the father she had only just found in these pages. A week later, she sat down at the old desk in the office. She took out a single sheet of plain paper and a pen. She thought for a long time. What could she possibly say? She decided on the truth. Simple, unadorned. She wrote to the address in Oregon, not to her mother, but to her aunt, the Eleanor Vance, whose name was on the slip of paper. Dear Ms. Vance, she wrote, my name is Alara Harmon. I believe you are my mother's sister. Her name was Lena. My father was Thomas Harmon. I am writing to you from Havenwood. I am at his house, the real one. He passed away recently. He left me a letter. I know what happened now. He wanted me to tell you that he loved her. He never stopped. And he wanted me to know that she loved me. If Lena is with you, or if you know where she is, please give her this message. Tell her I am not angry. Tell her I understand. And tell her the house is safe. The house held. Sincerely, Alara Harmon. She added the address of the funeral home at the bottom. She folded the letter, put it in an envelope, and addressed it. The next morning, she walked to the small post office in town and mailed it. The act of dropping it into the slot felt enormous, a message in a bottle cast into a vast, unknowable ocean. She had no idea if it would ever arrive. She had no idea if anyone would reply. But it was not an act of hope. It was an act of completion. She was taking control of her own story. She had closed the circle. She walked back to the funeral home, the snow crunching under her boots. The air was cold and clean. For the first time in her life, she felt truly, completely free. Spring arrived, painting Havenwood in tentative shades of green. The snow melted, and the earth smelled of life and renewal. The funeral home, once a monument to decay, was now a testament to resilience. Alara had spent the winter working. The house was transformed. The downstairs was complete. The floors, sanded by David and stained a warm honey color by Alara, gleamed, The walls were patched and painted a soft, creamy white. Martha's curtains hung on the windows, and the light that filled the rooms was cheerful and warm. The viewing parlor was now a living room, with a few pieces of furniture salvaged from the town's attics and lovingly repaired in her workshop. The family waiting room was a bright, spacious dining room. The sign outside had been carefully restored. She had painted over the words, "Funeral Services," leaving only the proud, simple Harmon and Son. It was a home now. It was her home. She had found her purpose here, in the town her father had loved. She was a part of it. She helped Silas in the store, her knowledge of tools and materials growing every day. She waited tables at the diner, listening to the town's stories. She was known not as the girl who inherited the ruin, but as Alara, as Thomas Harmon's daughter. The workshop was her sanctuary. She had begun to take on small projects for people in town, a wobbly chair to be mended, a new handle for a favorite tool, a picture frame, small things. She worked with her father's tools, following the plans he had left behind, feeling his guidance in the grain of the wood. She wasn't just restoring a house, she was continuing a legacy. One bright April afternoon, she was sitting on the front porch, which she had rebuilt with solid new planks and a sturdy railing. She was drinking a cup of coffee, Gage sleeping in a patch of sun at her feet. The air was warm and the sound of birdsong filled the lane. She looked out at her small kingdom, the neat porch, the tidy weeded yard where the first daffodils were pushing through the soil, the solid, beautiful house behind her. A sense of deep, quiet, earned peace settled over her. It was not the giddy thrill of victory, but the calm, solid contentment of a ship that has weathered a great storm and found a safe harbor. The house held. She had built a life here, out of the wreckage of her old one, a life of substance and meaning, a life her father would have been proud of. The familiar rattle of the mail truck broke the afternoon quiet. It was an old Jeep, driven by a cheerful man named Frank, who always had a piece of town gossip to share. He pulled up to her new mailbox, the one she had built herself and planted at the end of the lane. "Afternoon, Alara," he called out. "Got something for you today. Looks important." He put a few pieces of mail in the box and drove off with a wave. Alara didn't move at first. Most of her mail was flyers, bills for the electricity she now had, but Frank's tone had been different. Slowly, she got up and walked down the path to the mailbox. Gage woke up and trotted along behind her. She opened the small metal door. Inside were 2 flyers and a single letter. It was a cream-colored envelope, the same heavy paper as her father's last letter. The return address was in Portland, Oregon. Her breath caught in her chest. Her hands began to shake, just as they had when she first found her father's ledgers. She walked back to the porch and sank onto the top step. Gage rubbed against her leg, purring, sensing her turmoil. She held the envelope for a long time, just looking at it. The handwriting was an elegant, looping cursive, unfamiliar and feminine. This was it. The answer from the bottle she had thrown into the ocean. She was terrified of what it might say. That her mother was gone. That she wanted nothing to do with her. That the past was best left buried. But she had not come this far to be ruled by fear. With a steadying breath, she tore open the envelope. Inside was a single sheet of paper, filled with the same elegant script. "My dearest Alara," it began. "Your letter found me. It found us. Your Aunt Eleanor passed it to me last week. I have read it 100 times. I did not know if I would ever hear from you. I did not know how to reach you." The wall of silence was so tall. Your father was a good man, but he was a quiet man, and he was trapped. I never blamed him. Not really. I blamed the cruelty of this world, which has so little room for gentle things. I am so sorry for the years we have lost. I am so sorry for the lies you were told. Yes, I loved you. I have never stopped. There has not been a day in 23 years that I have not thought of you and wondered where you were, what you were doing, if you were happy. Your letter. It healed a part of me I thought would be broken forever. To know that he remembered me with love. To know that you are in his house, the real one. To know that you understand. You say the house held. My brave, strong girl. You are the one who held. You are your father's daughter, but you have my spirit. You are a force of nature. I'm an artist, Alara. I have a small studio here in Portland. I paint. Mostly landscapes. Mostly places I wish I could be. For years I have painted a house I have seen only in my memory. A house with a porch and a big yard in a quiet town. I would like to see the real one. I have a very old car and a little money saved. It is a long drive from Oregon to Havenwood. But I think I would like to take that drive very soon. If that's all right with you. All my love, your mother, Lena. The letter trembled in Ilara's hands. Tears streamed down her face, but they were not tears of sorrow or grief. They were tears of a deep, profound, and overwhelming joy. She was not an orphan. She was not a castaway. She was a daughter, a future she had never dared to imagine. A whole half of her life she had thought was lost forever, was now driving toward her, down a long road, coming home. She looked up from the letter, her vision blurred by tears. She looked at the house, her house, standing strong and proud against the afternoon sun. She looked at the open door. The door was open. The house was ready. She was ready. The legacy was not just the house, or the tools, or the truth. It was this, the chance to rebuild, the chance to begin again. A thing isn't ruined just because it's broken. It can be mended,